The Cry in the Dust. The world for Bartimaeus, or Bartimaeus as the Roman soldiers had shortened his name, was a symphony of sounds and a canvas of shadows. For 20 years, since a childhood fever had stolen his sight, his existence had been painted in the varying shades of black and gray. He knew the warmth of the sun on his face, the cool relief of shade, but not their colors. He knew the voices of the marketplace, the clatter of carts, the scent of spices and sweat, but not the faces from which the voices came. His place was by the roadside, just outside the bustling walls of Jericho, where the great road from Galilee led down to Jerusalem. It was a good spot for a beggar, a place where pilgrims, merchants, and Roman garrisons passed constantly. His voice, honed by years of practice, was a low, mournful call. Alms for the blind, have pity on Bartimaeus. He was a familiar fixture, a part of the city's scenery. People tossed him coins, often without a glance, their lives too full, the purpose too grand, to truly see the man in the dust. He knew the distinct jingle of Roman denarii, the heavier clink of a Jewish shekel, the rustle of rich robes as they passed, the soft whisper of a poor widow's mite. He also knew the feel of the sun-warmed dust beneath his calloused hands, the small pebbles he would nervously trace, the texture of his worn cloak. These were the things that anchored his world. Yet, despite his physical blindness, Bartimaeus possessed an acute inner sense. He heard the stories that drifted through the market, tales of a Nazarene teacher, Jesus, a man who spoke with authority, healed the sick, and, most remarkably, had opened the eyes of others born blind. At first he dismissed them as travelers' tales, exaggerated hopes from desperate people. But the stories persisted, gathering momentum, whispered from mouth to mouth, with a fervent belief that began to chip away at Bartimaeus' cynicism. A flicker of something he hadn't felt in decades, hope, began to stir in the depths of his shadowed world. He pictured this Jesus, not with his eyes but with his spirit. He imagined hands that were not dismissive, a voice that was not scornful. He imagined a touch that did not recoil. The more he heard, the more his inner canvas began to paint a picture of a man utterly unlike any he had ever known.
One morning, the air crackled with a different kind of energy. The usual sounds of the marketplace were amplified by a surging, restless crowd. Excitement pulsed through the very ground beneath Bartimaeus' hands. He heard his fellow beggars whispering, their voices trembling with the mix of awe and trepidation. "He's coming, the Nazarene! Jesus is passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem." Bartimaeus' heart leaped like a trapped bird. This was it. The chance. His one desperate chance. He had to act. He pushed himself up, his limbs stiff from years of sitting. The roar of the crowd grew, a human tide surging down the road. Fear, deep and primal, threatened to paralyze him. He was just a blind beggar, one among thousands. Who was he to demand attention from such a man? But the whisper of hope, once a flicker, now became a roaring fire in his soul. He took a deep breath, and then, with every ounce of strength and desperation he possessed, he unleashed a cry that cut through the cacophony of the crowd, a cry honed by years of pleading, but now imbued with raw, unshakable faith. "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me!" The crowd, annoyed by this interruption, immediately turned on him. "Be quiet," a stern voice commanded. "Don't bother the master. You'll disturb him." Others hissed at him, pushing at his shoulders, urging him to cease his clamor. But Bartimaeus had come too far. He had lived too long in the shadows, too long in silence. This was his moment, and he would not be silenced. With newfound strength, he cried out again, louder, more desperately than before, "Son of David, have mercy on me!" Then a hush fell over the clamor. Bartimaeus sensed a shift in the air, a stillness in the surging tide of people. The pushing stopped. The angry whispers faded. A single voice, calm and clear, cut through the quiet. Call him. Hope, so intense it felt like pain, surged through Bartimaeus. They were calling him. A flurry of hands, now gentle, helped him to his feet. "Cheer up," someone exclaimed. "On your feet. He's calling you."
Bartimaeus didn't need any more encouragement. He shrugged off his heavy outer cloak, the only valuable possession he owned, a symbol of his old life, casting it aside as if discarding his very blindness. He stumbled forward, guided by hands, by voices, by the pull of an unseen presence that drew him like a moth to a flame. He felt the warmth of that presence draw near. He could sense the man, the teacher, standing directly before him. A voice, full of gentle authority, spoke. "What do you want me to do for you?" The question was simple, yet profound. Bartimaeus had only one desire, one longing that had defined his adult life. "Rabbi," he pleaded, his voice thick with emotion, "I want to see." Jesus looked at him, not with pity, but with a deep, affirming love that pierced through Bartimaeus' inner darkness. "Go," Jesus said, "your faith has healed you." And in that instant, a blinding flash of light exploded behind Bartimaeus' eyes. It was not pain, but a sudden, overwhelming illumination. Shapes, colors, a world he had only ever heard or felt flooded his perception. He blinked, tears streaming down his face, tears not of sorrow, but of pure, unadulterated joy. He saw the dust on the road, the green of the olive trees, the blue of the sky. He saw the faces of the crowd, their expressions a mixture of shock and wonder. And then, his gaze fixed on the face of the man who had spoken his world into being. He saw Jesus. He saw the lines of compassion, the kind eyes, the gentle smile. He could see. He could truly see. The miracle was astounding, undeniable. The crowd erupted in praise to God, but Bartimaeus did not turn to celebrate with them. Nor did he run home to his former life. He did the only thing he could. He followed Jesus. He walked behind the Master, his eyes wide with wonder, drinking in every sight, every detail of the world he had never known. He had asked to see, and now that his physical eyes were opened, he realized he was seeing for the first time with the eyes of his soul as well. He had been a beggar in the dust, defined by his blindness. Now he was a disciple, defined by his sight, by his faith, and by the Master who would never leave him in the shadows again. Bartimaeus knew, with every fiber of his being, that once the Good Shepherd finds you, he welcomes you into his fold and ensures you walk in the light forever. Eyes that truly see. The road from Jericho, once a blur of shadows and the domain of beggars, was now a vibrant tapestry of colors and faces for Bartimaeus. Every leaf, every stone, every ripple in the air was a miracle. He walked, not as a blind man guided by a staff, but as a man led by an inner light, following Jesus with an unshakable devotion. He clung to the Master's words, his teachings about a kingdom of heaven where the last would be first and the unseen would be seen. When Jesus eventually moved on from Jericho, Bartimaeus, true to his word, followed him. He joined the growing throng of disciples and curious onlookers, listening intently to every parable, watching every miracle. But his transformation was not without its challenges. The crowds, while celebrating his healing, were often fickle. Some still saw him as
Bartimaeus, the once blind beggar, a relic of Jesus' power rather than a man reborn. The other disciples, accustomed to the hierarchy of the road, sometimes struggle to accept this former outcast fully into their midst. He was not a fisherman, a tax collector, or a scholar. He was a beggar who had cried out. Bartimaeus, however, carried no resentment. He remembered the darkness, the crushing weight of his former life. He knew the difference between being merely seen and being known. And Jesus, the Master, never treated Bartimaeus as anything less than a beloved child. He would often meet Bartimaeus' gaze with a gentle smile, a silent acknowledgement that transcended words. One day, as they journeyed through a small village, a commotion arose. A group of villagers were arguing bitterly over the division of a small inheritance. Voices were raised, tempers flared, and bitter words were exchanged, threatening to tear families apart. The situation was tense, filled with unspoken accusations and ancient grievances.
The other disciples, seeing the conflict, began to advise the Master to avoid the dispute. "It is not our place, Rabbi," Peter muttered. "Let them settle their own affairs." But Bartimaeus, watching the scene unfold with his newly opened eyes, saw something more profound than just a quarrel over property. He saw the same kind of blindness that had once afflicted him, only this was a blindness of the heart. He saw the way people's faces were contorted by greed, by stubborn pride, by an inability to truly see the pain they were inflicting on their own kin. He saw the shadows that fell over their souls, as real as the darkness he had once lived in. He took a hesitant step forward, his heart pounding. He, Bartimaeus, the former beggar who had spent his life dependent on others, now felt a strange compulsion to speak. He remembered how Jesus had seen past his outer condition to his inner need. "Master," Bartimaeus said, his voice surprisingly steady, May I speak to them?" The disciples looked at him in surprise, some with skepticism. Who was a former blind beggar to advise in such matters? But Jesus turned, his gaze gentle and encouraging. "Speak, Bartimaeus, for those who have been given sight often see the clearest." Bartimaeus walked towards the squabbling villagers, his heart full of a grace he had himself received. He did not speak of legalities or justice, he simply spoke of light and darkness. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying the echoes of his past pleading, but now imbued with a quiet authority. "Once I could not see the sun. I could not see your faces. My world was black. But Jesus, the Master, opened my eyes." He paused, letting his words sink in. "And now I see. I see the colors of the world, but I also see the darkness that can cling to a heart, even when its eyes are open. I see how anger can blind you to your brother's pain. I see how bitterness can cast a shadow over the clearest stream. You are looking at a field, at coins, at what is owed, but you are not seeing each other. You are blind to the love that once bound your families. Do not let the gifts of this world blind you to the true light that is found in forgiveness and reconciliation."
His words hung in the air, piercing the anger and defensiveness. Because he was Bartimaeus, the one they all knew, the one who had literally been blind, his words carried a weight that no one else's could. He was not judging them. He was sharing his own experience of darkness and light. Slowly, the villagers began to lower their voices. Some looked at their siblings, their neighbors, with a dawning recognition, a glimpse of the blindness Bartimaeus spoke of. The argument did not immediately dissolve, but something shifted. A seed of understanding had been planted. Jesus smiled at Bartimaeus, a profound and affirming smile. "You have indeed been given eyes that truly see, my son," he murmured. Bartimaeus realized that day that his healing was not just about physical sight. It was about seeing the world and people through the eyes of the Master. It was about using his testimony not just to praise God for his own miracle, but to bring light into the shadows of others' lives. He was no longer just the man who had been found by the shepherd. He was now a shepherd himself, in his own small way, gently guiding others out of their own blindness, reminding them that the Master's compassion was not only for him, but for all who cried out for light, and that no one, especially not those lost in the darkness of their own hearts, would ever be left behind.
The beacon in the darkness. Bartimaeus remained with Jesus through the final climactic journey to Jerusalem. He was there for the triumphal entry, his new eyes wide with wonder at the adulation, his heart heavy with a premonition of the darker storm gathering. He witnessed the cleansing of the temple, the furious debates with the Pharisees, and the final poignant suppers. He heard Jesus' final teachings, words that resonated with the darkness he once knew and the glorious light that was to come. Then came the agonizing days, the betrayal, the trial, the slow, agonizing walk up Golgotha. Bartimaeus, standing among the weeping women and scattered disciples, saw every brutal detail. He saw the face of the Master, etched not with anger, but with an incomprehensible love. He saw the nails, the blood, the final breath. For 3 days, his world, once so brilliantly illuminated, plunged into a darkness more profound than his physical blindness. His sight was intact, but his spirit was shattered. Had the light truly gone out? But then came the dawn of the 3rd day, the news of the empty tomb, the bewildered joy of the women, the dawning hope in the disciples' eyes. Bartimaeus, remembering Jesus' words about resurrection, felt the light rekindled within him, stronger and more radiant than before. He saw the risen Christ, not with his physical eyes alone, but with the eyes of his faith, recognizing the true power of the one who had given him sight. After Jesus' ascension, the disciples, filled with the Holy Spirit, began to spread the message. Bartimaeus, once a silent figure by the roadside, now became a powerful living testimony. He chose not to remain in Jerusalem, but to return to his roots, to the very roads and villages where he had once begged. He returned to Jericho. His reappearance caused a sensation. The people remembered him, the beggar who had cried out. Now he walked among them, his eyes bright, his step firm. He no longer needed charity, but he gave it freely, sharing his meager possessions and, more importantly, his story. He would begin, his voice carrying the familiar resonance of his begging days, but now filled with an undeniable joy. I was blind. I sat in darkness asking for coins. But Jesus, the Son of David, heard my cry. He opened my eyes, not just to the sun and the trees, but to the living God. He walked the dusty roads, his feet now knowing the path not by feel, but by sight. He sought out the outcasts, the lonely, the ones who felt forgotten, the very people he used to be. He would sit with them, listen to their stories, and then, with a gentle touch, he would share his own. He spoke not of abstract theology, but of a personal encounter with the light of the world. Bartimaeus became a beacon. His own scars from the thorns of the thicket, faint as they were, and the memory of his blindness, became symbols of hope. He reminded everyone that no matter how deep their darkness, whether it was physical blindness or the blindness of addiction or the shadows of despair, there was a light powerful enough to dispel it. He specifically reached out to other beggars, those who, like his former self, felt invisible. He showed them that their voices mattered, that their cries would be heard, and that their brokenness was not a barrier to grace. He taught them to cry out, not for alms, but for the Master who could give them eternal sight. Years passed, and the Christian community in Jericho thrived, largely due to Bartimaeus' tireless work and testimony. He established a small gathering place, not a grand synagogue, but a humal room where people could gather, share meals, and hear the stories of Jesus. He who had once been on the receiving end of pity now dispensed boundless compassion. In his old age, Bartimaeus' physical sight began to dim once more, a gentle fading rather than a sudden darkness. He sometimes needed a guiding hand or a familiar voice to lead him, yet there was no fear in his eyes. His gaze was serene, confident. "My outer eyes may cloud again," he told the younger believers who now guided him. "But the inner light, the light that Jesus gave me, that light will never dim. For I have seen the Master, and his light is eternal. He brought me out of the deepest darkness, and he has promised never to leave me in the shadows again." And so, Bartimaeus, the blind beggar of Jericho, became a living testament to the unwavering love of the Good Shepherd. He showed that the one who has been found, cherished, and brought into the light becomes a light themselves, a beacon shining in the darkness, reminding all of God's children that no matter where they are, no matter how lost they feel, the Master will always hear their cry, and he will never, ever leave them behind.
The echo in the heart. Bartimaeus passed peacefully in his sleep, a venerable old man whose life had been a living sermon. The last thing he saw with his earthly eyes was the soft, familiar dawn breaking over the hills of Jericho, a sight he had cherished every day since Jesus had called him from the dust. His passing was not a moment of sorrowful darkness for the community he had nurtured, but a quiet, reflective celebration of a life that had shown them the true meaning of light. For years after his death, the small gathering place in Jericho, now known simply as Bartimaeus' Fold, continued to thrive. It was a haven for the outcast, a place where all were welcome, a testament to the radical love Bartimaeus had both received and faithfully shared. The stories of Jesus were told and retold, always interwoven with the powerful testimony of the blind beggar who saw. Yet as time stretched on, the world outside Bartimaeus' Fold grew increasingly complex. The Roman Empire's grip tightened, bringing new taxes, new laws, and a pervasive sense of oppression. Within the Christian communities across the region, subtle divisions began to emerge. Some focused on strict adherence to the law, others on elaborate rituals, and a few became obsessed with theological debates that often overshadowed the simple, profound message of love. In Jericho, a younger generation grew up hearing the stories of Bartimaeus, but they had not known the man himself. For some, the story became just that, a story, a legend from a bygone era, rather than a living truth. The daily struggles of life, the pressures of Roman rule, and the growing complexity of their faith began to make the lessons of radical compassion seem quaint, perhaps even impractical. The elder leaders of Bartimaeus' Fold, men and women who had walked with the old man, noticed a subtle but worrying shift. Arguments, once rare, began to surface over minor issues. A new young deacon, Bartimaeus, while zealous and eloquent, found himself often siding with those who advocated for stricter rules and a more exclusive interpretation of the faith. He believed that to protect the truth, they must draw clearer lines, separate themselves from the less worthy. He began to subtly question the wisdom of Bartimaeus' boundless inclusivity. "Old ways are for old times," Bartimaeus argued one evening after refusing entry to a known tax collector who sought comfort in the fold. Bartimaeus was a simpler man for a simpler age. We must be discerning. We must protect the purity of our fellowship. One night, a harsh winter storm swept through Jericho. The wind howled, the rain lashed down, and a section of the ancient city wall, already weakened by age, crumbled, sending rocks and debris into a residential area, trapping several families. Panic gripped the city. The Roman soldiers sealed off the damaged area, preventing entry until the morning. In Bartimaeus' Fold, Bartimaeus argued that they should pray for the trapped, but that direct intervention was too dangerous and frankly beyond their resources. "It is a Roman matter.
we cannot risk our own for such a task. But an elderly woman, Sarah, who had been a child when Bartimaeus was healed, rose. Her voice, though frail, carried the conviction of years. Bartimaeus would not have waited for morning. He would not have waited for permission. He would not have calculated the risk. He would have heard the cries in the darkness, and he would have gone. A deep silence fell over the room. The memory of Bartimaeus, the man who had cried out from the dust, and then returned to bring light to others, filled the space. The story was not just a legend, it was a living spirit, an echo in their hearts. Matthias looked around, seeing the faces of the others, faces etched with memories of the man who had shown them unending compassion. He saw their inner conflict mirroring his own. He remembered Bartimaeus' testimony. He saw past my outer condition to my inner need. Suddenly, the strict rules and the need for purity seemed hollow. He heard not the cries of the trapped families, but the distant echo of Bartimaeus' own desperate cry, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And he heard the shepherd's answer. "Get ropes," Matthias commanded, his voice now strong and decisive, "and lamps. We go now." That night, guided by Matthias, the believers of Bartimaeus' fold worked tirelessly alongside their neighbors, Samaritans, Jews, and even some reluctant Romans, to free the trapped. They risked their lives, carrying the injured, clearing rubble, offering comfort where they could. They acted not out of obligation, but out of a deep-seated, unconditional love that had been ignited by a blind man who saw. As the first light of dawn broke, illuminating the scene of rescue and compassion, Matthias found himself by the very spot where Bartimaeus had once begged. He looked out at the city, at the faces of people he had once judged as less worthy, now united in a common cause. He saw the true light of the Master reflected in their selfless acts. He finally understood. Bartimaeus' miracle wasn't just about seeing the sun. It was about learning to see the unseen needs of others, and then becoming the hands and feet of the shepherd who never leaves any of his children behind. The stories, the legends, the very air of Jericho continued to echo with the unwavering truth that the light Bartimaeus found was not just for him, but for all, a beacon shining in every darkness, urging every heart to cry out, and then to become a light for others, extending the fold of compassion to all who are in need. The shepherd's love truly had no end, for its children learned to become shepherds themselves.
The enduring light of Jericho. Centuries turned into millennia. The dusty roads of Jericho witnessed empires rise and fall, the passage of countless legions, and the ceaseless ebb and flow of humanity. Bartimaeus' fold, the humble gathering place, gave way to larger churches, built with stone and mortar, but the spirit ignited by a blind man's cry remained. The story of Bartimaeus, once a local legend, became scripture, read and cherished in congregations across the globe. Yet, even with the written word, there remained the constant human struggle to truly embody the radical compassion Bartimaeus had lived. The message of the shepherd who leaves the 99 for the one could sometimes feel distant, abstract, especially in times of peace and prosperity. The urgency of the cry in the dust might fade, replaced by comfortable routines. In a generation far removed from the desert roads of ancient Judea, there arose a time of great global challenge. A devastating plague swept across the lands, confining people to their homes, striking fear into every heart. Hospitals overflowed, and communities wrestled with isolation and despair. In a modern city, built where ancient Jericho once stood, a young, idealistic doctor named Alara worked tirelessly in an overwhelmed clinic.
Elarana was a woman of faith raised with the stories of Jesus. She knew Bartimaeus' tale intimately, but in the relentless daily grind of suffering, The demands on her energy and compassion were immense. She, like Matthias generations before, felt the pressure to prioritize, to make difficult choices. With limited resources and countless patients, the temptation to focus on those with the best chance, to streamline care, to protect the 99 by giving less to the one who seemed most lost, was a constant gnawing whisper. One particularly dark night, after losing yet another patient, a homeless man whom others had deemed too far gone and not worth the resources, Elarana collapsed onto a cold bench. The weight of her decisions, the fatigue, and the creeping despair threatened to overwhelm her. She felt like she was back in the darkness, unable to see a path forward. In that profound exhaustion, a small, worn, leather-bound book fell from her bag, landing open on the floor. It was her grandmother's Bible, the pages thin from years of turning. Her gaze fell on a familiar passage, one she had read countless times, yet now it struck her with new force. And Jesus stood still and commanded him to be called. Jesus stood still. The words echoed in her mind. He stood still for Bartimaeus, the unknown, the inconvenient, the one the crowd wanted silenced. He didn't just walk past. He stopped. He saw. He called. And then she remembered another part of the story, a detail she had always overlooked. Bartimaeus casting aside his cloak, stumbling forward, crying out again. He didn't wait to be perfectly guided. He pressed on.
Alara closed her eyes. She thought of Bartimaeus' blindness, his desperation, his radical act of faith. She thought of his transformation, not just into a seeing man, but into a beacon of compassion. She realized this story wasn't just about a miracle in the past. It was a living truth for her right now. The shepherd's heart wasn't abstract. It was an active, unwavering love that called her to see the person, not just the prognosis. The next morning, Alara walked into the clinic with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't have unlimited resources, but she had a renewed heart. She implemented small, seemingly insignificant changes. Instead of just triaging, she insisted that every patient, no matter their condition, be met with a personal greeting, a moment of eye contact, a question about their story. She personally sought out the homeless, the overlooked, the too far gone, ensuring they received not just medical care, but human dignity. She began to tell Bartimaeus' story to her fellow doctors and nurses, not as a religious tale, but as a testament to the power of truly seeing each individual. She reminded them of the shepherd who would not leave the 99 without a protector, but whose heart ached for the one lost in the dark. Slowly, subtly, a transformation began in the clinic. The weariness remained, the challenges persisted, but a new spirit of profound compassion began to permeate the halls. Doctors and nurses, inspired by Alara's unwavering example and the echo of Bartimaeus' story, found a renewed strength. They learned to stand still for their most vulnerable patients, to call them, to see past the diagnosis to the person.
Years later, when the plague finally receded, the city looked back with awe at the clinic's extraordinary resilience and compassion. It had become a legend in its own right, known not just for its medical breakthroughs, but for its profound humanity. A place where no one, no matter how lost or forgotten, was ever left behind. Alara, now a seasoned doctor, stood one day by a window in the clinic, looking out at the thriving city. She thought of Bartimaeus, the blind beggar by the Jericho road, whose cry had reverberated through millennia. She understood that the shepherd's unwavering heart was not confined to ancient hills or written pages. It was a living, breathing reality, continually echoing through the hearts of those who dared to see the unseen, to listen to the unheard, and to ensure that his enduring light would forever shine, leaving no child, no matter the era, no matter the challenge, lost in the darkness. The miracle of Bartimaeus was not just his sight, but the endless, radiating compassion it sparked in the world.